Thanks for joining me, everybody. Karl Hughes here again with another episode of Retain Trust. And today I have my longtime friend, mentor, at one point coach, Sam Shepler on the show. So thanks for joining me, Sam. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me, Karl. It's great to be here. And yeah, really excited to chat today.
I always get a lot out of our calls, whether they are official and I'm paying you for your time, or unofficial and I'm not paying you for your time and I'm stealing your time. So I'm happy to steal your time today. Sam, give us a little bit of background on yourself. I know you've been in the agency world for quite a while now. You own a fairly good-sized agency at this point. So tell me your story real quick, and then I got a whole bunch of questions to throw at you.
Absolutely. And I think for the audience, Karl's being a bit modest. I probably learned just as much from him, and every time we chat, it's been great to follow your trajectory with all the acquisitions. So yeah, hugely impressed. A little bit of background on myself. Started my first business was more of a generalist video agency. I ran that from 2012 to 2016. Basically started it up right out of school. Sold that company in 2016. Bummed around for a year trying to kind of figure out what I wanted to do next. Heard about productized services in 2016, 2017. That kind of idea of a productized service was starting to kind of come on the map more. Basically, having a very specific focus and building your service around a very repeatable process and a specialty, so you could remove yourself as the founder from both the delivery and the sales of that service. One of our biggest products at the generalist video agency was customer testimonial videos. So kind of took that knowledge that I had built up at agency one, parlayed that into productized service called Testimonial Hero. Have grown that, almost, approaching mid 7 figures. This year we'll do about 4.5 million in revenue. And yeah, awesome team. Have a general manager who runs it. So I'm, pretty out of the day-to-day there. And yeah, I'm just really, now I'm focusing on we acquired a couple of companies as well earlier this year, and now I'm focusing on growing Testimonial Hero, and especially by acquisition, and hopefully acquiring a couple more companies. And the larger vision, which I haven't talked about much, but I'll share, is to really build a portfolio of category leading productized and tech enabled video brands. So we have Testimonial Hero for video testimonials, obviously. And we have some ideas, which I can't announce yet, for 2 or 3 other ones that we're either going to acquire or incubate and start out ourselves.
Awesome. We're going to have a lot of fun things to talk about then, because I feel like our visions are somewhat similar in what we're trying to build and the acquisition strategy. So we'll talk about that for sure. Someday we'll be competing for the same companies to buy, I'm sure. But in the meantime, we can stay friends, right?
Yes.
The world's a big place. No.
Yes.
Let's go back to productizing, because this is a term that I think this is probably how we first got to know each other a little, because we both sort of were in this productized service world for 3-4 years ago when I was starting draft.dev. And I was a software engineer before this. So that always really appealed to me, because it's like a service business, but I don't quite have to be so free and open with, we do everything for everybody. It's like, instead I can make this very constrained service. What appealed to you about productized services? Because you had run a video agency, and I'm sure there were things there that were annoying and that productized services kind of solved for you. What was like the appeal to you though, Sam?
Early on, some of the appeal of productized services was the promise of recurring revenue. That's a whole nother topic, but I'll say, like, one of my biggest learnings is that you can build a great productized service without monthly recurring revenue, like a Testimonial Hero approaching mid 7 figures in revenue, 7 figures in profit. We have no monthly recurring revenue. We have a lot of recurring customers, but we don't have anyone. Well, we don't have very many people at all on a subscription. So I think, it's, in my opinion, it's way more about, the lifetime value of a customer than, monthly recurring revenue necessarily for marketing services, because the churn on marketing services is so high compared to software that like when monthly recurring revenue effectively just becomes like a payment plan if you're honest with yourself in a lot of situations. But most people aren't honest with themselves about that. Another topic we could dig into. But so I think initially though, like that was the first thing. I was like, wait, I can, that was like that shiny object that got me interested in it. And then other than that, it was just like the scalability, which is very true. I think like it's very hard when you're at in a full service video agency, when you're reinventing the wheel and doing custom projects. Again, that can work really well. It's just a very different thing. And you as the founder, often you have to kind of be very involved to make sure that custom project goes well. With productized services, the appeal is that like you could actually engineer a process and you can do what I call like value innovation on that process. You can figure out a really good process, and then you can actually have the process be executed by other people and still get a great product and kind of remove yourself, because you get intellectual property, you get IP through specialization, and you figure out better ways to do things. So you're able to still deliver something that's very high quality, but also, have that process and remove yourself from it and make it very scalable.
Totally. Yeah. I remember for me, I read a book not long before I started Draft.dev called The E-Myth Revisited. And I've probably mentioned it in the show because it's something I dropped that book to everybody. But it was one of those game changers for me. My dad ran a small business when I was growing up. So I saw small business ownership as like almost this ball and chain, right? Where it's like, it means he had to be there at the company every single day, running the antique store, doing everything. But the E-Myth really opened my eyes to the whole, oh, this could actually be a small business, but it's also repeatable and scalable. And he's got this whole, he calls it like a prototype kind of model where you build out the sort of process really well and document it, and then you hand it off to other people. So simple. I mean, at the end of the day, it sounds like you're saying it and I'm saying it sounds simple, but in reality, it is hard to pull off, especially in a service business. But it's a huge game changer when you can do it. I think the tricky part there too, you kind of hinted at this with the recurring revenue, is often what I see early, like people who are just starting a productized service, what they try to do is like basically come up with their own idea of what they want out of the business and then hope they can find customers for it, rather than the reverse, which is like, what do customers actually want? Now let's try to design a productizable service around it, right? And I think that's something you probably did. You did well because you already had this video agency. Tell me about spinning it out, because that's got to be tricky, right? Like taking a subset of that business and like, kind of keeping it versus letting the rest go. Like, how did you manage that?
Yeah. So actually, I didn't spin it out. My first business was acquired. So I sold the first company in 2016, not for a huge amount of money.
Well, like non-repeatable agencies don't go for big dollars, right? Like we kind of know that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It was more like, truth be told, like the situation was, basically me and my co-founders, we were great friends. We were best friends. We're still friends, but like, we're kind of like tired of like working together a little bit, or at least that's how I remember it. Maybe they feel differently, but we had a opportunity to sell the company, and it seemed cool, and it was like a little bit of money and also like a great salary that was more than what we were making paying ourselves. So, like we're working it was through a national PR company. It was like a PR agency, national PR agency that wanted to add on video capability. So like I basically DM'd someone on their leadership team on LinkedIn, and I was like, hey, I see you guys are building like some video capabilities. Why don't you just buy us? And they're like, interesting. Yeah, let's chat. And then it basically progressed from there. And that's exactly like it ended up happening. So to answer your question, like, so basically like I did work there for a bit, had a non-compete. And then once my non-compete was over, that's when I basically, just started again, from scratch with Testimonial Hero, but not from scratch from an intellectual and experience perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting insight there, and I've seen this a pattern where like a lot of entrepreneurs, their first business, it's like they do everything not wrong, but like you know what you did wrong, you know what you did right, right, and you can come back to it like the second time around, it's going to be faster to build back up. You're going to do so many, you're going to have seen things, you're going to have won client deals that you know didn't have confidence to win the first time around. Like so many things get easier that second time, but at the same time, like you know, productizing puts limits in place. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is like, for you, did you ever struggle with that whole saying no to clients? Because I'm sure people came to you once you start Testimonial Hero and they're like, well, I know you do Testimonial Sam, but like, could you also do X, Y, and Z? Like, how did you handle that? Did you say yes occasionally? Did you just blanket no every time with that? Like, was it a easy or hard thing for you?
Yeah, it's a great question in terms of, what do you do? How do you handle it when, irregular projects kind of come to you that don't fit that productized mold? I think the good news is like it's always an option. You can always consider, it's a good thing to have, right? You can always consider, do I want to do this? And the way I think about it is, one, I think it's surprising how many of them do come to you. Like you do good work on what you do on a productized level, and people are afraid to specify and niche down because they feel like they're like excluding all these other services or all these other markets, all these other personas. But like you do good work, and like people are going to ask you and come to you anyway. So it's always a business decision. Like early on, in general, you might take on a lot of those if you think you can do a good job with them and do them profitably. And that's great. Like early on, you need all the revenue you can get. Like later on, maybe not. The way that I've always thought about it is like, one, can I do a really good job with this? Because like, if you take on something that's out of your wheelhouse and you don't do a good job with it, and like that kind of ruins your reputation. And like I kind of learned that lesson once the hard way. Like we had a very early on in the business, we had a testimonial client, did awesome work. They loved our testimonials. And then they asked us if we could do something. And I thought I could do it, but like it was kind of out of my wheelhouse. I tried to do it. They didn't love it. And they didn't do any testimonials with us after that. So like that kind of ruined the relationship. And like that was my fault. Like that was 100% my fault. So I think, thankfully, like, learn the lesson. So yeah, to me, it's like, can you do it well and can you do it profitably, right? Those are the most important things to consider.
Yeah, my experience has been similar with draft.dev. Is we often will have, so I think about it this way, like service businesses, you have your website version of what you do, which is like hopefully your ideal case, right? Like that's like where you're heading with all your marketing, and you're trying to push in that direction. So it'll, here's our target demographic, here is the kind of service we do, and here's our pricing or some idea of the engagement structure at least. That's a pretty typical like thing to put on your website. That said, we all in the service industry have those clients who don't quite meet that mold, but we're servicing them anyway because we can do it well, we can do it profitably, we can do it like for better, like higher revenue numbers because maybe they are a really big company that needs us to work in a special way that's a little different. We've always had one or two of those at draft.dev. No matter how productized we look from the outside, there's always a little bit of that gray area down there in the real world. And so it's interesting to hear you say that, because I think the outside perception is people probably look at our businesses and they say, how'd they build a, $3 million business that does just this and this? And you're like, well, we do, but there's maybe another 500K in there is like actually some other stuff. And then there's another 500K is maybe some other stuff. And like, it's fuzzier than real life, I think.
It's really true. And I think that brings up another, really good point is like a lot of the benefit of productization is the specificity of your positioning and how that helps you market and actually go out and create demand, right? So I think, you get the benefit of the specificity and the focused positioning and focused offer through your productization. And then you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. Because yes, absolutely. Like on the back end, once you have the relationship with the customer and you get them in the door, they're going to, ask you for some other tangential things. And then, now, almost 7 years into Testimonial Hero, we're actually in earnest looking at doing a lot more of those adjacent service offerings, right? With launching new brands, as I mentioned. So I think that's the key, though, is like, I think we waited almost 7 years to do that in earnest, right? So ultimately, like, it's very important to try and increase share of wallet from your existing customers, right? So you definitely do want to sell them more things. At the same time, you want to master what you're doing first as well. So, like, I'm a big fan of like focus, mastery, then diversification in that order.
Yeah, I love that. And this actually brings me to my next question. And I've got a couple thoughts / questions here involved. So one thing I've observed is that productized services are, easier and better to get started with because they have a narrow market, a very specific thing you offer. It's like easier for the founder to scale and get out of the day-to-day. It's easier to hire salespeople in a productized service. And we can talk about sales later too, but like, it's a lot easier to hire an agency sales guy who sells a very specific thing than one who sells just general purpose consulting, especially because that person, may not be an expert in the service. So anyway, there's a lot of advantages to it. The challenge or limit that I start to see, and I want to know if you see this too, because I think this is true, is like, there is a cap to how big a productized service can be if it's truly dogmatic about staying productized and staying narrow in its band of offering. There are ways to increase that cap. You can go after different market segments. You can kind of like, have different branding segments that start to hit different segments of the market. There's what you're doing and I'm doing as well, like acquiring other companies that are maybe, adjacent that also might have a similar client base or something like that. But at some point, like, and I tell this to people who have these like unlimited design services and things like that. Like, I think it's a great idea, but like, look, you don't see unlimited design services going for $100 million. There are $100 million agencies, but they don't just do one thing anymore. Like, they start to have to do more. Has that been true in your observation? Am I missing anything there? Like, Sam, I'm always curious to run this by people. Like, is that a limitation of productized service, or do I have limited thinking? Sam, welcome back. Your internet is out, but we've got you on mobile, so we'll just make this work.
Absolutely. We're doing it live. Karl, you asked a really good question about, you've noticed that it's like, how big can a productized service really get? And like, when do you need to go broader? And this is something that's true for any company. And it's really all about like, when do you move into those strategic adjacencies? And this is not a challenge that's unique to productized services. Again, it's really any company. Again, think about Nike from the early days. It was like track shoes, basketball shoes, tennis shoes. They moved into arguably some really bad adjacencies that didn't work out, but like, they survived. So I think so much of strategy is picking what the next adjacency you're going to get into is, in my opinion. You can do that by, depending on your brand, like you could do that by building a larger arc of services under one existing brand. You see like a lot of massive agencies, like 50, 100, $200 million agencies. That's why these huge agencies have so many services. I've talked to some of the owners of these companies, and like, they absolutely say like, clients who use more of our services are stickier, and like, it's very, very helpful to have all these services, which is super interesting for us as productized services founders, because it's like, we're kind of the antithesis of that. But coming back to like the point I made earlier, I do think it's like, often the fastest way to get from like 0 to 1 million or 0 to 2 million is productizing. To get to 10 million, 20 million beyond, like, you do have to figure out a way to increase your arc of services, move into smart adjacencies, whether organically or by acquisition. Those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, which is a perfect segue to my next section of questions, which is about the acquisition strategy inside of things, because we're both doing this now. So you buying 2 written case study companies this year makes me think that you are actively pursuing these like adjacent markets that have a lot of crossover. Tell me more about it. Like, what kind of got you started on that path, and then like, what is the sort of your sort of thought on the strategy going forward too?
In terms of acquisitions and how valuable they are, the acquisitions that add new capabilities that are strategically aligned are typically better than just buying revenue, because there's a lot of different ways to drive revenue. And you can just invest more in marketing, invest more in sales, and acquire revenue. And however, adding an entirely new capability, like for us, like written case studies that you can cross sell, that's strategic, and that would take like multiple years to really figure out how to do it correctly, figure out all the process and tooling for it. Or you could just buy that capability and have the ready built team, ready built processes. To me, like that was a really good acquisition. Those were great acquisitions for us, and they've been extremely accretive, and they've helped us a ton. And not to say we won't do any acquisitions in the future that aren't just buying revenue. I think there is a place for that, but I'm a huge fan of using small acquisitions to build out new capabilities that are strategically important to where you want to go.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I agree with you. There's two draws to acquisitions. One is the exposure to a new client base, and then the other one is getting new capacity. What is interesting about your path and versus mine is with draft.dev, I felt like the problem I wanted to solve through acquisitions was I was in a very constrained small market because we only work with these developer tools companies. And so in order to say go access a new market that we didn't currently serve, I would have had to go back to square zero to start acquiring clients. It would have been a long road because our whole marketing positioning was very aimed at dev tools and the needs they have, which are very unique. And so we actually, when we looked at acquiring the other business, the podcast consultant, it was more about the client side of things than it was the service capacity, although we got both. And so at the end of the day, I also didn't want to have to learn to produce podcasts. So to be fair, we do benefit from that greatly. But I actually think our what I found has been the biggest benefit in our case was more of that client side. So I think again, it's situational, right? There's no right answer. Like this stuff is all very nuanced and depends on your goals and how you're positioning yourself. But that's a really interesting observation on the new capacity. So what other capacities do you foresee Testimonial Hero eventually coming, bringing in? And again, this can be kind of long-term abstract or a little more tactical if you've got stuff in mind already.
You raised a really good point. It depends on your goals. It also depends on your exit strategy. If you have a very specific exit strategy, or if you're trying to build a holdco and you're just long-term hold, like a bunch of different businesses that may or may not be directly related. That's one strategy. And then arguably the easiest way, which is not exactly what we're doing, but arguably the easiest, you see a lot of agencies do this, is the 8 big agency playbook is they acquire new capabilities to kind of build out their arc of services, but they run them all through the one brand, right? And then they make a case for all this EBITDA is together in this one brand. They get multiple expansion on whatever they pay for the small agency by when you can actually get multiple expansion, it's almost
free money.
Yes, free money.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously harder than that in practice, but to kind of give listeners who may not be familiar with the term, because it is a good lesson. Multiple expansion is the idea that, and I'll use some concrete numbers here. A small agency, say under $3-5 million in revenue, probably trades at a 2 to 4, maybe 5x of earnings. And usually that's going to be SDE or EBITDA, depending on how the valuation works. But whatever, it trades in a 2 to 4 multiple, let's call it. But then once you get an agency in the 5, 10, $20 million range of revenue, your multiple starts to go up significantly because you start to be more attractive to larger target buyers with deeper pockets. And also building a business that big is just legitimately harder than building a business under, $3-5 million or where the smaller ones are. So I think that there's a big advantage there if you can, again, like you're saying, Sam, if you want to put together a $20 million agency by buying 10 $2 million agencies, theoretically, you can greatly increase your total valuation by doing that. Now, in practice, again, the integration of 5, 10 agencies is not a trivial task. So I think that's where, again, it on paper, it all looks a lot easier than it is in reality, right?
100%. And you hit the nail on the head, is like, to get rewarded for that multiple expansion, like there has to be some legitimate integration, right?
Yeah, yeah. So just kind of wondering about what capacity you could see continuing to add to Testimonial Hero. It's like you've got video testimonials, you've got written testimonials. What other things make sense in the long term for you?
I will also say, like, we will probably add these new capabilities under different brands, because Testimonial Hero is such a focused brand name. It's in the name, it's testimonials.
It'd be hard to offer like SEO consulting through Testimonial Hero, right? Like it's a little bit of a far field.
Yeah, exactly. So we're planning to probably launch 2 or 3 more brands that have a little bit broader, more open-ended brand names. And the question is, what else do our target buyers want to buy, and how can we help deliver that to them at the same quality and experience that they're used to with Testimonial Hero? We mostly work with B2B marketers, a lot of B2B software marketers. So, product demos, product explainers, brand videos, those would all be types of companies that we'd be looking to acquire. So if you run a video agency, and any video agency, and especially if you're majority, B2B in your customer base, definitely reach out to me. Find me on LinkedIn, Sam Shepler, or shoot me an email. And yeah, we'd love to chat. But that's kind of the strategy, is like focus on cross sell, focus on expanding share of wallet with our core customers.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of like full circle. It feels like, where it's like you started an all-purpose video agency, you sold it, and then you started a very specific niche video agency, and now you're slowly building an all-purpose video agency as well. And again, no wrong answers here. Like that's kind of what I find very fun, freeing, and challenging all at once with running a small business that gets beyond a certain point. Is at some point it gets very open-ended. There's no right and wrongs, and there's no one way to do this. And what I found is, like, the bigger we get and the more the business kind of runs on its own, has a life of its own, the more open-ended the world becomes. Like for me as a founder and owner, have you felt that same way, Sam, where it's like, there's no playbook anymore. You're past X in revenue. Like, it's you decide how you want to go about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about like going broad again, or, maybe we'll have like 3 or 4 or 5, maybe it'll be like a portfolio of productized services that are all kind of category leaders in their niche. From a branding perspective, like that's what I would love to do.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I
Same.
love focused brands. It's just so fun. You can do so much with the marketing. You can be very specific with your go to market from like a actual like logistics perspective of like marketing 5 different brand properties. Then I'm like, maybe not as fun, but that's honestly what I'm wrestling with. It's like, do we launch a new productized service and we're trying to create like 4 testimonial heroes, or are we trying to create like 1 or 2 more broader brands? So TBD on that. I think that's an ongoing conversation. We talked about it today, in fact, with my executive team. I will also say it's like a lot of it depends on your timeline and your exit strategy. If I was someone I'm not, proactively trying to like sell the business in 3 to 5 years, but like if I was trying to, then I would minimize the number of brands, because like buyers want a cohesive brand. They probably want one brand. Again, it all comes into play. What's your exit strategy? What's your timeline? What are you trying to get out of the business?
That's a really good point, and something I think a lot of entrepreneurs, in my experience, don't develop early enough, or they just never develop, is a 10-year goal for like what they're really trying to do here. And what I mean is, like, I think you should run a business very differently if your goal in 10 years is just to continue running a small business. Like, you want to be actively involved in it. You want to have like a, personal stake in all the client relationships, versus you want to sell in 5 to 10 years to a large strategic or a private equity company. Like, the way you run those two companies should be very different. And a lot of people, because they don't really know, they're just kind of like floating through life with like, man, maybe that would be cool. Maybe I'll try to grow this year. Maybe I won't try to grow. Maybe I'll try to take a lot of vacation this year. It's like, if you don't have a focused direction, you're going to have a really hard time hitting any of those goals, because they're hard, and you're going to need to focus a bit.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think a good thing to keep in mind is, like, if you're having trouble thinking bigger, try thinking longer.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like if you're having trouble thinking you can't have a big vision, just try thinking in 10-year terms, think in decades. Like that's really the key to, in my opinion, to like expanding your vision is just expanding the time frame that you're thinking about.
I remember Sam a couple of years ago, we were talking and you were kind of like, yeah, maybe I'll just like, let this thing ride passively. I'll just kind of back away and I can do work on other projects or something. But it seems like you've gotten reinvigorated into Testimonial Hero. Yeah. Tell me about that. How do you get yourself kind of back online and thinking like, ooh, there's a big 10-year vision here that's exciting?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think it's really important because half of the battle in entrepreneurship is like making sure you have the energy to show up every day and
Yeah, if you don't like it, you better either get the fuck out or, like find a way to move on.
yeah, 100%. I think honestly it's just like realizing like the grass is always greener. I think it took me a while, but I've kind of finally realized my initial drive to like put in a general manager into my business, which I accomplished at the beginning of 2022, was my assumption was like, oh, like I'll once I have a GM in place, I'll work on it. My next business, which could be even bigger and whatever. Like I thought there was something bigger and better, waiting for me. Like I didn't have that larger vision. So what really got me reinvigorated is just seeing the vision, thinking longer, seeing that we could grow by acquisition, seeing that we could build new brands and ultimately seeing a path to 10, 20, $30 million in revenue. Once I actually saw that and I'm like, we actually have a competitive advantage and like we have a good chance at achieving those goals. And then actually realizing that like a lot of the other ideas I had was like kind of grass is greener thing. Maybe if I'm being honest with myself, I didn't have a competitive advantage. Like software is awesome. I don't personally have a competitive advantage in software. I'm not technical. Could I run a software company? Absolutely. Especially if I had a technical co-founder. I would love to do that one day, but like it probably require like a technical co-founder to have a competitive advantage. So like I think it's just a mix of like being honest with myself about like my strengths and weaknesses and where my competitive advantage is, for better for worse, which I do think I have a huge competitive advantage in the agency and product as service space. Again, coming back to if you're having trouble thinking bigger, try thinking longer. I just thought longer out and I realized like, hey, like we can keep compounding. Like we can hit 8 figures, we can hit 20 million. It's not crazy. Like if you just think about the time frame and do the math, and then you do the math on the cash flow from that, and everything looks good. And that's what honestly got me excited again.
Totally. I think that whole being honest with yourself about what your superpower is as an entrepreneur is a huge factor. Yeah, I think the same way. It's like versus the way I think about it is like versus the average small agency owner. What do I do exceptionally better, or how do I work exceptionally better than them? And again, in not all ways am I better by any means. Like there's a lot of things I'm deficient at that I am not good at. But there's some things that I do tend to be like just naturally I have like an inclination towards. And that's like, okay, great. How do I lean into those and make that our superpower for how we grow this thing versus trying to like be something you're not, like you said, with the technical, co-founder thing. I had a similar thought with my partner. We were talking about maybe we should buy a SaaS company. And then I'm like, yeah, but that means somebody's got to go in there and run engineering on day one, which is going to be me because I've done that in the past. Like, I don't want to do that. It's just knowing what you do and don't want to do and aren't good at is really a huge factor in this whole thing and deciding your vision, I think. I was going to ask you this, Sam. We've both gone through the process of buying another agency now. So share what you can about that experience. Was it very intentional? Were you like building a list of here's the agencies I might want to buy and reaching out to them? Was it kind of opportunistic? They came to you and, knew who you were. Like, what was that whole process of finding, a company to buy or two companies to buy rather?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the Case Study Buddy acquisition, Case Study Buddy, great company, primarily majority written case studies, but also did some video testimonials as well. And they were a pretty direct competitor, but we always had myself and their founding team, Joel Klecki and Jen Enns, we always had a good relationship over the years. And like I always kept in touch with them. And I think like maybe like 3 years before we actually did the deal, like maybe 2.5, 3 years, I floated this idea to them about us potentially acquiring them. And like we chatted about it off and on, like maybe like once or twice a year, I'd check in, we'd have a quick chat. And timing wasn't right, but I was always around, always checking in with them. So like there was some like mutual intention there, but the timing wasn't right. And then eventually some things changed on their end and the timing, became right. And obviously like we had kept in touch. So I think that was like the big thing there. The learning there is like these things can take 3 years to actually get to the point where it makes sense for both parties. And so it seemed like it came together really quickly when it happened. But if I actually zoom out, like we had been like chatting about it and like spitballing here and there once or twice a year for like multiple years. And I think that's another thing is like I have a ton of respect for them and I always respected what they were doing. And I think that was sort of mutual. And even though we were competitors, we had a great relationship. And I think there's something to be said for that in the lesson. It's like, I think a lot of people have way too much animosity toward their competitors or like get rivalry. I mean, the market's so big. There's an abundance of opportunity for everyone. And like probably one reason that helped them do a deal with me is like we'd always had a really good relationship. So I think that's another takeaway is like your competitors can also be your best partners or your best acquisition target. So like I think it's really important to remember that. So I think that's important. And then the second one, kind of sort of similar. We had never talked about actually, like, I had always kept in touch with them. In that case, we had not talked about any overt acquisition. It was more, we'd done partnership stuff prior because we had done some partnership stuff. When the acquisition opportunity came up, they thought of me and reached out. So, like, I had privately, without telling them, I had thought of this. The second one was this is called Upshot, and they were a carve out of a much larger company. And basically, like I always thought the much larger company that we ended up carving them out from would maybe acquire us one day. So I wasn't sure how it would work, but I was like, well, either we'd love to acquire them or their parent company would acquire us potentially. And then it ended up being the former. But yeah, just staying on the radar, building relationships, I think really helped there.
There's a lot there. One of the things that I pull away from that, and I have a similar mentality, is like keep your friends close and your enemies closer, right? And I don't really mean I don't actually think of my competitors as enemies so much as like you're talking about here, where like they're just another entity out there doing something similar, and there's overlap, and occasionally we're up against the same clients, but pretty rarely. Usually we have our own lanes that we're kind of in. And then I've always just thought of them from day one at draft.dev. I remember building a list of competitors and being like, all right, I just want to stay on these people's radar enough. And I want to keep them in my radar enough that if someday I want to sell, those are the people I go to. If someday maybe they want to sell, I want them to think of me, right? Because you never know which way this stuff's going to go. I mean, if I had to say a serious family health incident, maybe I want to sell and I got to get out in the near future. I want to know my 5 biggest competitors so I can go talk to them. They're the fastest probably way out if that's a necessity. So I think it's a super smart thing you did there, just like planting that seed early and just staying in touch. And like, you never know, right? Things happen. It's good.
Yeah. And honestly, like it's happened so many times over my career. Mostly it's just like referrals, but like your quote unquote competitors are your best referral partners too. So I think that's important. I'm a big fan of having the mindset of co-opetition. It's a portmanteau between cooperation and competition, but like, yeah, co-opetition. I think that's the mindset I try to bring to these sort of things.
Totally. So one last thing on the acquisition side I wanted to bring up, because we were talking about this before. And so personally, I went through all year trying to buy a competitor or two and reached out to a dozen or so and ended up with, some pretty close calls with like 3 of them. And none of them went through. It was a disappointment. And I kind of was looking back at the end of the year and I'm like, end of 2024. And I'm just kind of like, man, what did I do? I couldn't get a deal done. Like my whole job as CEO was to try to get, buy something else. But that's the way it goes, right? And I think this is one of the challenging things about acquisitions is that it's like a really big sale process that is so kind of luck of timing based, right? Like, what's your thought on that now having gone through it? And I presume you probably had some deals that fell through too along the way. Like, what have you learned about those feelings of that roller coaster?
Yeah, it's a really great point. Like since those deals, I've tried to do more other deals that have fallen through. So I know exactly what you mean. Let me ask you a question. Of the deals you've been trying to do this year, were all of them like self-sourced, like proprietary deals, or were any of them like at it like a broker essentially?
Yeah. So all the deals for the first acquisition were self-sourced, and for this one have been self-sourced. All the ones I got serious with. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what I've learned indirectly, but also like what a acquisition mentor of mine taught me, it was basically it's like proprietary deals sound great, but like the problem is there's people who actually don't want to sell. If they wanted to sell, they would go to a broker and sell their damn business. So like you're wasting your goddamn time. That's not always true, but it's true. So like basically he told me he's acquired 7 businesses, and basically he's like every single one of those businesses had a broker, because that's the thing is like you can get people to start conversations when you reach out to them, but a lot of times they're just kicking tires, you're curious, but like ultimately, like if people are serious about selling, the first thing they do is go find a broker to help them sell the business. And like one of my big takeaways is, yeah, just keeping in mind, like if they're not working with a broker, like you can't take it that seriously. And then one of my also big learnings is, and I've wasted so much time with this in hindsight, but like it's having, and again, I also learned this from coach as well, but he basically said like, look, like you got to have like really firm deal criteria, and some of it has to be non-negotiable. So when you originate these deals, because like similar to you, I'm quite good at like deal origination. Like I'm good at proprietary outreach and like getting people interested to chat. But like, and then I would go down these like rabbit holes and, listen to them and like, oh, maybe we can do a creative deal. Like, maybe this works. Maybe this doesn't work. My mentor here basically said like, Sam, like, be like, here's the terms that we do the deal on. Like, this is the non-negotiable parts. Like these parts are negotiable, but like, and then it's very quickly, like they're either on board with that or not. And you don't end up spending, months trying to like go back and forth these like creative deal terms. It's tricky because like I say all that, but then I'm always thinking like, wait, maybe there's some really juicy proprietary deal out there I can source.
I know. I shit on brokers sometimes in conversation with other entrepreneurs because they can be pretty tough to work with. And what I mean is like, I've had experiences with brokers that where they kind of make the entrepreneur feel like they're going to get a bunch of ad backs that are not realistic, or that they sort of, tell them there's more of a market here than there is. And, again, not all of them are like that. And I don't mean that I'm 100% biased against them, but I think there's pros and cons to both approaches. You're totally right, though, with the proprietary outreach and the way that I'm doing it, sourcing them from scratch. So far, at least, I've been doing it. It is extremely difficult to get it over the finish line because, yes, getting somebody interested, maybe I can do that. But then there's getting them to sign an LOI. And even that LOI, it's non-binding. And we're going to go into 3 to 6 months of diligence and bank stuff to get it done. And at any time they could get cold feet or something could change in their life or their business. It is extremely, I feel like I got really lucky the first time around. And I'm not going to replicate that again, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And like, personally, I haven't had as much experience with brokers, but I'm about to. So like, we'll have to trade notes on that.
We will. We'll have to come back to this.
And the thing is like, what I do know about brokers is like, they've run the gamut in terms of quality. Unlike some professions, like I'm not sure if there's any like license you need to like be a business broker. Like, so, and there's some firms like totally like overinflate the seller's expectations. So they like get them to sign up. And then once they're paying them their monthly fee, like then, so it's like, it really varies like how some brokers do a great job educating their sellers. Some do a terrible job, and it's tricky. I mean, in a perfect world, like it would be nice to have like inbound deal flow, inbound proprietary deals, right? Like I think that's what companies like tiny.com and others out there who've like built a reputation. So like they get people who are actually ready to sell, but they're coming to them. That's probably the goal. I mean, ultimately. But yeah, it's tricky. Like the thing is, unless people are retiring or they have a health reason or a divorce or any of those like death, disability, divorce, retirement, like unless there's some trigger, a lot of times for services businesses, they're going to see that valuation and they're going to be like, I'll just keep running it. Like, and if there's no reason for them to sell it, that's understandable. Like, but that's the market valuation. And it's like you said, we're in the 2 to 4x EBITDA range when we're under 5 million in revenue typically for these businesses. So you're looking at probably like 50% down, 25% seller note, 25% earn out. So it's like, a lot of times people just, once they realize that, they just hold on to it unless there's one of those precipitating events.
Yeah, totally. Oh, this is Sam. I'm sure we could go on for many hours, but given that you've already been so generous with your time, I will start to wrap it up here. Last question I like to ask people, because I'm a big reader and I'm always looking to add to my book list. Any books you've read in the last couple of years that really influenced your journey as an entrepreneur? Anything like that?
I like the book The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. I like a lot of business biographies, in particular Shoe Dog and Made in America, Sam Walton, both really good. I read a lot of history. I think that's helpful just to like have some perspective on life. That's a little bit of a history buff. And then, I think like honestly reading like philosophy and psychology is also like pretty important. Like a lot of entrepreneurship is about just managing your own psychology. So I've been enjoying some of I think books by Alain de Botton. I think it's like School of Life. He has like a series there. It's like a pretty accessible like philosophy and stuff. Yeah, I've been enjoying those. Yeah, Awesomely Simple. I think that was a good business book early on. I think that was a really good overview. Yeah, I mean, I could go on, but those are
that's going to fill up my reading list for the next 6 months. So that's great, Sam. I really appreciate the time again, Sam. This is always fun to catch up with you, whether it's on the pod or off. Where's the best place to follow up with you? LinkedIn? We can put the links to that. Email? What do you prefer?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn is good. Sam Shepler on LinkedIn. I'm on X. It's also at Sam Shepler. And I do, for fun, coach agency founders, productized founders. So feel free to hit me up and I can share more info on that. I usually coach like 2 or 3 people, a couple hours a month on the side. So I'm always happy to chat about that as well.
Yeah, I'll endorse you there for that. I think I have a video testimonial talking about how great you are, but I will also just say on the pod that I've worked with Sam and it was a great experience, especially learning some really tactical sales stuff about agency sales, which we didn't even talk about. I feel like that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could have gone down, man.
Yeah.
100%. Well, I'll have you back on for that later. Thanks again for the time, Sam. It's great to see you. And thanks for listening, everybody. Thank you for watching this episode of Retain Trust. If you like this one, give it a thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube. It takes 2 seconds and it helps others find out about the show. And if you have questions or suggestions for a future episode, leave a comment. See you next time.